I don't mind paying. I just, as long as I have the option.
So that's kind of what he said.
Cool. That's good. All right, guys. Welcome back. Session 7. We want to get to work. It's 6:59. Okay, we'll wait. Live stream and all that. Please silence all electronic devices, including your cell phones. No, we don't have that problem. So while we're waiting, you guys give me the green light when ready to go. While we're waiting, we're good? How are the exercises going for everybody? I'm just wondering, speculating, if you're like, too many. There's no way I could ever catch up and do all those exercises. Too much time with my spouse. Too much work. So if that's the case for you, read through them and be selective. Try to find the most important things or the things that are most relevant to your situation. Of course, I'm going to argue that they're all good, but some are particularly relevant to what you're going through. Mike. Good. Gotta know you can lose weight from mental exercise. Good to know. Funny, man. Funny. What? No, I did. Oh, come on. No, that's why I'm so skinny, because it's good. Cliv, okay, finally we can start. Cliv is here. Amber, too. All right, welcome back into the state. All right, I don't know if we're waiting for anybody else. I really want to get started. We're good on live stream? Already got the thumbs up, got a double thumbs up. All right, so let us begin. I really apologize, and I'm sorry for the inconvenience of last week, canceling. I had that stomach virus thing that's been going around everywhere. So that was fun. Good news is, it didn't last nearly as long as I thought it would. So within like 2 days, I was back at it. But man, that wasn't fun. So sorry for the inconvenience. So we have tonight's session, next week, and then we're going to do the group thing. Okay, so we're almost done, which I'm excited about, like having got to this point. All right, let me just get into it. Tonight, we're on chapter 10. Okay, we're going to do chapter 10 and 11. Can you believe it? Because I'm going to fly through chapter 10, coping with typical solvable problems. Here's what I want to do for you guys. I want to pull out just all the main key points. So here's what chapter 10, and then we're going to get on to chapter 11. And chapter 11, I'm just going to summarize it because there's just a few nuggets that you need to understand, and it takes Gottman a lot of pages to get through that, but it's really super simple. Chapter 11 is this: dealing with the perpetual or unsolvable problems. So chapter 9 is about the solvable. Chapter 11 is about the unsolvable. There's some overlap, but there's one key difference that you need to walk away with tonight. So if you just get that, you're good. You understand the difference. And you'll know in the future when to plug in what, and you'll know how to analyze and diagnose which problem are we having right now. Is it solvable or unsolvable? Super simple. Okay, so chapter 10 is coping with typical solvable problems. He lists 7 categories of problems you might be having. Okay, so I'm just going to pull out just the best bullet points from each of those 7. So here we go. And I'll list them out for you. So pay attention. You may need to do an update to your value system. So if I asked everybody to raise their hand if you're willing to change and adjust, you would all raise your hands, right? Because you may have, yes. And if you raise your hand, it's a reflection of wisdom, let me tell you. But you may be doing it wrong and not know it, okay? So, by the way, I got to do a quick commercial. Jordan Peterson, if you're familiar, he just came out with the book, second part of a series, 12 More Rules for Life Beyond Order, I want to say it's called. Rule 9 and 10 are especially awesome and very relevant to what we've been talking about. Chapter 10 is about marriage and relationships. Really good chapter, a lot of wisdom there. Chapter 9 is about journaling. Why? Why do we do it? What does it accomplish? Really good insight. Again, I love to glean knowledge and wisdom from people who've been doing something for 40, 50 years. It's just awesome. So just want to recommend that to you. But here we go. Here are the 7. Internet-fueled distractions, including porn. 2, work stress. 3, in-laws. 4, money. 5, housework. 6, a new baby. 7, sex. Those are the problems that most couples face. You guys find like your problems fit into one of those 7? Typically, does that make, or you have something completely out there that has no, so I'm not going to say everything that Gottman says, but I want to pull out the nuggets, like I said. So here we go. Internet-fueled distractions, including porn. One study of young professionals, we said this already before, weeks back, of young professional couples found that the average amount of time they actually engaged in conversation with their spouse was, Mike, well done, 35 minutes per week. And these discussions were mainly about running errands. Now, how are you going to stay connected with someone if you don't talk to them? How? But guess what? If they're spending a majority of their time at work, I bet you they are talking to someone, connecting with someone, you know what I mean? Sometimes we can come to the point where you feel like your family, your work family is more family than your family because you're there so much. You know what I mean? So it takes intentionality is what I'm saying. Okay. Electronic distractions, including whether email, texting, social media, video games, or Netflix, get in the way and even replace times of communication and connection. This can interfere with a spouse feeling like they come first in a marriage. By the way, that's so critical. I don't care what it is. We're going to talk more about this in just a second. I don't care what it is. Your spouse can never feel like something that takes priority. I don't care what it is. It just can't happen. So whatever you're putting, guess what? Here's how it works. Whatever you're putting over and above your spouse, that thing, if it's important to you, you're actually jeopardizing that thing, whatever it might be, by putting it over your spouse. You know, it's the idea of this. If everything's going well in life, but your marriage is not good, everything's not going well in life. It spills over into everything else. But if it's good in your marriage and all the world's messed up and throwing a bunch of stuff at you, you're going to be all right. You'll be able to face it. It's just like having that foundation, and what Gottman continually says, the sense of we-ness. It's the idea of you and me against the world. That you got to have that in a marriage. And there's certain things, we're going to hit it when we hit the in-laws in just a second. But it's you and me against the world. So he's saying electronic devices can actually threaten that sense of we-ness. Because they get in the way and even replace times of communication and connection. This can interfere with a spouse feeling like they come first in a marriage. It is important that when your spouse comes into a room, that you acknowledge them. A spouse needs to feel that you are fully present with them and not distracted. Here's looking at you, Rebecca. No, I'm just kidding. You took that really well. Good for you. Couples need to establish rules of etiquette, which include what information and images are appropriate to post online. I'm going to say it again. What information and images are appropriate to post online? My wife has a lot of fun with this, all right? And I just love to get her all kinds of freedom. I never tell her don't post that unless she asks me. But agree on a specific daily time limit for engaging in these activities. That can include work emails, you know? Stick to the schedule for a week, say, and then reevaluate your feelings about the issue. Sometimes couples use diversions as a way to avoid communication and connection. So be on the lookout for that. So all I've said this, when it comes to electronic devices, whether it's video games or Netflix, social media or work emails, whatever it might be, Have agreed upon etiquette, rules, okay? So it doesn't get in the way, especially if you're on a date night. I'm going to throw that out there. So he puts in, Gottman adds pornography to this category. Instead of doing an 8th category, he just adds it to this one. So there's a couple things about pornography that are just helpful to know. You may not know. So here we go. This is brief. The American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy estimates that between 20 and 33% of internet users in the United States go online for sex, for sexual purposes, either to view pornographic images or to engage in some sort of sexual interaction. Gottman says most of these people are married men. Now, Rebecca and I, we have known couples that the wife is completely fine with the husband having pornography. We knew them right when they got married. We haven't talked to them in a long, so I don't know how that played out. But I think even if that were a possibility, because we're trying to be as objective as possible, I think that's the exception, not the norm. So, porn is a form of, guess what Gottman calls it? Relationship betrayal. The results of porn use include, so this is the science part, the results of porn use include less frequent sex, less mutually satisfying sex. Porn causes your brain to rewire, making connection and intimacy with the real person much more difficult. Scientific data for that. Your brain actually rewires, and it makes intimacy and connection with an actual real person more difficult. Okay? So it does have long-term effects. Now, here's the illustration that I use to kind of summarize some things that Gottman is saying. People can continually overeat, right? They eat way too much, and yet still be starving. Follow me on this. People can overeat but still be starving. Why? Because they eat junk food lacking any nutrition that the body needs. So they're getting these signals, indications from their stomach, oh, we're hungry, and I eat food, I'm still hungry, and I eat food, I'm still hungry, I still feel hungry. Because the body's not asking for food, it's asking for nutrition. It's like, okay, I need you to be a little discriminating in your food selection because I keep sending you signals that we're hungry because I need nutrition, and you keep giving me junk food. Masturbating to porn is like that. I think this is, to me, the most important thing to understand about pornography. This is helpful. Masturbating to porn is like that. What the person really needs is intimacy and connection with their spouse, sexual release, instead of connection and intimacy, is a misdiagnosis by listening to your body but ignoring your soul. So here's what I liken it to. Like a man gets an urge, let's say, and he thinks, oh, that urge means I need to look at porn. But he's misinterpreting the data. Just like much like the person who's overeating, eating junk food instead of nutrition, he's misinterpreting the data. What his body and soul are actually needing and desiring and requesting is intimacy and connection. You see? But if you go the porn route, it makes actual intimacy and connection, which will satisfy what the body needs and what the soul needs. It makes that more difficult. Okay. Also, a person who consistently denies their spouse sexual intimacy is breaking that marriage vow and setting up their marriage for an adulterous affair. Now, I think Peterson, in his Rule 10, talking about marriage, does an excellent job of explaining why if a couple's not having sex and someone, say one was withholding the other having sex, you are just begging for the other person to have an affair, whether it's emotional or physical, or both, okay? And that's just helpful to know. And he's seen a lot of cases over the course of his practice. That's just helpful to know. All right, so that's internet-fueled distractions, including porn. Secondly, work stress. Make it a habit to stop whatever you're doing and greet each other when you come home from work. So I want to make that commitment. Like, I love that. Like, we do that a lot, but I don't think it's every single time. So I want to make that, because I want that built into the culture of our marriage. Make it a habit to stop whatever you're doing and greet each other when you come home from work. Scheduling formal griping sessions can prevent the spillover of everyday stress into your marriage. Be considerate of what your spouse has had to contend with at work. Realize your spouse may need time to themselves when they first arrive home from work. They may need time. Realize the tendency to overreact to something your spouse did because you're feeling burdened from work stress and taking it out on your spouse. Just all helpful, basic stuff, right? Nothing rocket science there, but actually all very helpful. Make it a habit to spend, and we've said this already, I just want to repeat it. Make it a habit to spend 20 to 30 minutes having a, "How was your day, dear?" chat. Some people want to unburden themselves when they barely walk through the door, but others need to decompress on their own for a while before they're ready to interact. Be aware of the ideal timing for each of you so that you're both in the mood to talk. Consider this a sanctioned whining session during which each person gets to complain about any catastrophes that occurred, while the other is focused on listening, being understanding, and supportive. So what's happening there? The stress is resulting in you having a deeper bond with your spouse. Isn't that cool? Yes. Making lemons out of lemonade, right? All right, that's all we have for that. Thirdly, in-laws. In-laws. And children. We're going to get to children in a moment as well. But thirdly, in-laws primarily, or parents. Parents... This is critical, so catch this. Parents, including in-laws and children, must know that your marriage comes first. You are a husband or wife first before you are a son, daughter, mom, or dad. This needs to be communicated directly to anyone your spouse feels like a second-class citizen to. This may be an unpleasant conversation to let your parents know that your spouse comes first, but eventually, Gottman says, they will come around. It is absolutely critical, he says, for the marriage that your spouse and family members know that your marriage comes first. You have to stand with your spouse. You cannot stand in the middle between your parents and your spouse. Failing to do so means that you have chosen to break your marriage vows and have chosen to have a bad marriage. So for instance, with kids still in the home primarily, if it brings all kinds of security and stability for the child to know that mom and dad are that tight. Because they know if mom and dad are together and tight and love each other, the result for me is security and stability, and everything's going to be okay for me too. Okay? So what Gottman is saying is this in his book. He says, if in-laws, parents, whoever has been a problem, anybody, and he lists out the family members, any family member that's coming between you and your spouse, the person whose biological relative it actually is, needs to have the conversation to directly communicate to them that, hey, my wife comes first. I'm a husband first. Because if she says, if you don't have that, you've obliterated your sense of we-ness. Now he says this, he says at first, you can imagine, a mom hearing that from her son. She might get her feelings hurt, right? She might shed a tear or so. But Gottman says she's going to come around and you're going to reap all kinds of benefits. She should understand. Maybe not at first, but she will come around. If you don't do that, you sacrifice your sense of we-ness. All right, there's something else about that. I think that covers it. Oh, here it is. I have it in my notes. You must also along that same line commit this. No, none of you guys are guilty of this. I know this. Okay, we're just going to say this just for the sake of saying it. You must also commit to never badmouth your spouse to your parents or children. Ever. Directly or indirectly, actively or passively. Griping and complaining about your spouse is different than seeking counsel regarding a problem your marriage is having. Do you see the difference in those two things? So you say to your spouse, like, hey, I want to pursue or approach so-and-so to get help with the situation we're dealing with right now. I need some counsel. That's a whole different thing than going behind your spouse's back with your girlfriends or your mom and talking bad, or to your grown children and talking anything negative about your spouse. Now, if you do that, you are putting that person over and above your spouse. It's like shooting yourself in the foot. Like, it's so counterproductive. Okay? So if you haven't talked about that, just like that needs to be a value. And Gottman gives an example where that in fact was happening. By the way, a spouse will find out, because people are intelligent, they will find out that you're doing it. You think it's secret, it's going to come out. They will notice a difference in how the person treats them when they're around them. And there's going to be all kinds of trickle-down effects because now, but what happens next time there's a holiday and you ask your spouse to go to that holiday, and now they feel all kinds of tension because, you know what I mean? And really, you're causing your family members to lose respect for you and your marriage. Because they know, they're like, okay, yes, I'm reaping benefits because my family member is putting me first above their spouse. I'm reaping those benefits because there's a connection I have with them that's even greater than the connection they have with their own spouse. But at the same time, they're also losing respect because they understand that, hey, they know that it is appropriate for you to put your spouse first. Is there anybody here who would disagree that it's inappropriate to put your spouse first? So, now, that being said, if you have a tendency to put children or a parent over and above your spouse, when we get to chapter 11, I really believe that what Gottman's going to give us there is going to shine some light as to why you would choose to do so. Okay? So it would be important to realize, because this is such a social norm, I would call it, that if you're breaking that social norm, there's an underlying reason why you would do that. And that needs to be discovered before the pattern can be broken. Chapter 11 is helpful to that end, okay? All right. If your spouse perceives that a family member is taking precedence over the marriage and is a problem, then it's a problem, regardless if you agree with their perception or not. Okay? Again, that's a direct quote from Gottman. If your spouse perceives it's a problem, it's a problem. That's what he's saying. You may not agree with their perception, but it's still a problem that needs to be dealt with if you're going to have a good marriage. Is that clear? Pretty good? If this is a perpetual or unsolvable problem, then see the next chapter, chapter 11. Okay, moving on. Category 4, money. There's not much here. How people spend their money, but this is helpful. How they spend their money reflects their underlying value system and is symbolic of the many emotional needs like safety or power. A marriage can come into conflict when one spouse values security and the other values pleasure or freedom. So a lot of times they say money is one of the number one reasons why couples get divorced, right? Or one of the number one stressors that will come onto a marriage. But I don't think it's enough to just look at the money. You got to look at what's underneath money as far as what is the value that's driving them. So, for instance, someone could have grown up in a poor environment, living paycheck to paycheck. A lot of times the lights got turned off or there wasn't enough food. And can you see how that person would want to be much more frugal, have a greater savings, because they never want to enter that sense of desperation and scarcity. The person who grew up with plenty to eat, never had that kind of problem, doesn't have those fears or concerns whatsoever. So for them, security is not as big a deal because they've always had security, but the spouse hasn't. So one likes to go on elaborate vacations, the other one likes to save. Both are receiving pleasure. I receive pleasure because I feel secure and safe. The other person receives pleasure from the way they spend their money because they want to use it elaborately on freedom and fun. So there's the money part. Resolving money issues requires creating a budget. Of course, you know this. Creating a budget you both agree on. And then there's a great exercise where he lays out a bunch of categories on page 208. You should check. If money's an issue, check that out on that section in chapter 10. Gottman gives an example of a couple. They had 3 bank accounts, one for him, one for her, and one mutual. Okay? I'm going to argue that you got to have a singular vision for your money. Okay. I could say more, but I'm going to leave it there because I want to stick with Gottman. Number 5, housework. Housework is actually makes the list. Can you believe that? You guys don't have any problems with that, do you? Now, what I'm about ready to say, I realize there are exceptions. Okay, I get that. But Gottman says this, simple. Housework? Yeah, simple. Men, you have to do more housework. That's pretty much all there is to the chapter. Yeah. I mean, like, that'll solve the problem. Men, yeah, you actually have to do more than you're doing. Okay, the end. No, there's actually a little bit more. Most men overestimate the amount of housework they do. Now, that's just not true in our house, is it? No. Now, the opposite can be true, of course, but if housework is by the way, increasing our housework will improve our sex life. Straight up Gottman quote. Improve your housework, sex life will improve. Yeah, so you know what? Maybe experiment with that. Find out if it's true. If housework is a problem in your marriage, then spend time itemizing who does what. Now, that's something you may never have taken the time to do. Itemize who does what. Gottman has an awesome list that pretty much includes everything. Walk through the list, say, I do this, you do that, I do this, you do that. That's going to help a lot. Gottman, so what's important is that the distribution of the housework seems fair to both parties. The distribution seems fair. It's not likely it's going to be 50-50. And that's not the critical thing. The critical thing is both parties agree that the distribution of chores is fair. Okay? And that's all we get there. But if that's your issue, again, see the exercises and lists in that section, chapter 10. Number 6, becoming parents. There's one critical thing you got to take away. Maybe not for you, but for someone else. This is so good. Becoming parents. 67% of wives experience a precipitous decline in their marriage satisfaction in the year after the baby is born. For the husband, the dissatisfaction usually kicks in later as a result of his wife's unhappiness. Reasons include lack of sleep, feeling overwhelmed and unappreciated, the profound responsibility for caring for such a helpless little baby, juggling motherhood and a job, etc. So that begs the question, why do 67% of new moms experience a decline in dissatisfaction with their marriage, and why did the rest of the percentage actually grow closer together? What is it that separates the categories? There's one primary thing. Gottman argues that there's one main reason why after a baby some marriages are never better and others are miserable. You ready for the answer? See, that's for emphasis. See, that phone is telling us just how important this really is. Do you know why it's really important? You guys got the answer in your head? Can you figure it out? Why, after a baby's born, within that first year, some are in great decline, some are prospering better than ever. What might separate it? It has everything to do with whether the husband experiences the transformation to parenthood along with his wife. I'll say it again. It has everything to do with whether the husband makes that transition to parenthood along with the wife. Or he feels like he got left behind. So for the mom, it's nothing less than an utter reorientation of meaning in her life. The wife is embracing a new sense of we-ness that includes their child, while the husband may still be pining for just the two of us. The husband must realize he can't get his wife back during this time, but rather must follow her into the new realm she has entered. The husband must learn to take pride in not only being a husband, but then also a father. The reason men may take longer to bond with their children is that, as countless studies have confirmed, women tend to be more nurturing towards their children, while men are more playful. And since most men assume that you really can't play with a helpless baby, they don't feel engaged by their child for much of the crucial first year. Dads, however, must discover that their infant is more than a blob and can, even as a newborn, be a great playmate. I realize this about myself. I always say this. I'm waiting for the baby to get old enough where it can talk, where we can have a conversation. But before that, I pretty much see it as a blob, right? As Gottman calls it. And like people hand me a baby, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with it. Like, just wait. I'll just wait. Wait till they're older. Then we're going to be. But that's actually not true. So healthy marriages learn to carve out time for just the two of you. Oh, by the way, it's also true in neuroscience that they say when the baby's born, like in the hospital, there's a profound bond that is created as the baby passes through the birth canal, and like the hormones that are released and all that as a result. So that the mom is propelled almost instantaneously, they say, into what they call the mom brain. But for the dad, the development of the dad brain takes longer. So it's just kind of a natural thing that unless we're intentional about it, the dad can feel like he's left behind. He's like, man, this baby's just stole my wife. Gets all her time, gets all her attention, gets all her affection. Man, what a jip. Okay? But the dad, dad has to be brought into the process, otherwise the marriage is going to take a hit. Dad, the husband also has to realize, hey, we're not going to go back to the time where it's just the two of us. We have to move forward into this new experience. Okay. Healthy marriages learn to carve out time for just the two of you, maintaining the priority of their marriage itself. That is to say, healthy marriages say, it doesn't matter that we just had a baby or have a baby now, we're going to have date nights. We're going to find time to have sex, intentionally. We're not going to just let that go by the wayside, okay? The more the wife acknowledges what the husband has given up and lets him focus on how central he still is to her life, the more understanding and supportive he will be able to be. If she never has any time for just the marriage, he will have a tendency to withdraw from the relationship. So what is Gottman saying? Hey, the husband during this transition, he just needs a little bit more affirmation. He needs to know that you still love him, appreciate him, be supportive of it. They acknowledge the sacrifice he's making, and then he'll come along with you. Lastly, it will be helpful for the marriage if the husband is able to modify his work hours so that the mom, the wife and mom, has time to take a break and, I think this is so appropriate, reconnect with the outside world. It's like when moms first have babies, like they're going into quarantine. No contact with outside world. Okay? So husbands can help with that. All right, so that was category 6, becoming parents. Last category is sex. So notice that Gottman didn't choose to put porn under this category. So that's interesting. He puts it under the electronic devices because that's usually where porn's looked at. So that's interesting how he categorizes. But lastly, sex. Valuing and supporting the friendship between partners is the key to long-term satisfaction in your sex life. It's the friendship. It's the companionship. Couples have to learn to talk clearly about sex without it being awkward. Do you have that ability? Learn to talk to each other about sex in a way that lets each partner feel safe. This results in better sex. Ask questions like, you ready for these questions? I'm just picking out a few from the long list that Gottman gives. These are all good. Ask questions like, hey, what felt good last time? What do you need to make sex better? What makes sex more like love-making to you? I think it's a great question. What makes sex more like love-making to you? Do you feel comfortable saying no to sex? Is it okay for me to try to get you in the mood if you're on the fence about having sex? So, I don't know who might be more interested, the husbands or the wives, but you guys, I challenge you, to take the quality of your sex life quiz on page 224. I know you all can't wait to do that. The quality of your sex life on page 224. It is possible that one spouse thinks it's amazing, right? Off the charts, it's fireworks, while simultaneously the other spouse is like, no, not so much. It is possible for one spouse to think it's awesome and be oblivious to the fact that the spouse isn't feeling the same kind of way, I think. Now, I could go further to explain why that might be and how that could happen, but I'm just going to put it briefly and say this. There is the idea that's out there in pop culture, the idea of a woman faking an orgasm. There's a very specific reason why that happens. I guess I'll leave it at that. So take the quiz. So sex is not just about orgasm. It's about making a connection. That's kind of what we said about reference to pornography. Thus, foreplay is part of sex, and foreplay occurs every time you turn towards your partner when they make a bid for connection. Okay? So for instance, you make a point to get up from what you're doing and greet your spouse when they walk through the door. That's foreplay. Your spouse comes to you to talk about a problem they're having, and you give it your full attention. That's foreplay. Learn how to, this is the last thing, learn how to initiate sex and to refuse it gently while still affirming your attractiveness to your spouse. Husbands who, Gottman makes this point, this is the last point he makes. He says, husbands who reward their wives for saying no end up having a lot more sex. What? You guys catch that? So say the wife says no a lot. Maybe she's tired, in a certain season of her life, maybe just had a baby, whatever. The husband who can hear the word no and be totally cool with it, and then kind of reward her, ends up having a lot more sex. Like he said, like up to 4 times a week. When before he was getting no a lot. So don't get discouraged. Don't let your feelings be hurt. Reward her for saying no. How do you reward her? Well, do you need a foot massage? Whatever it might be. You know what I mean? It deflates tension and stress, and then next thing you know, Gottman says you can end up having a lot more sex if you do those things. I think that's really helpful to know. All right, so that's it. Do we have for chapter 10? I flew through that. There's a few more things, but those are the main bullets from that chapter. Now, as we transition to chapter 11, Principle 6, overcoming gridlock. Principle 6, overcoming gridlock. I want to make this as simple as possible because I want you to be able to take this with you. Now, the reason anybody experience gridlock? You guys never experienced that, right? So, the way Gottman describes it is this: 2 clenched fists coming at each other. Okay? The reason we experience gridlock in our perpetual problems is because we fail to fully understand the deep meaning our spouse attaches to the situation or issue involved. That's critical. We fail to understand why it matters so much to our spouse. So you have a position, they have a position, you won't budge, they won't budge. Oftentimes the reason that is because we haven't taken it deep enough to understand why it's so meaningful, either for ourselves or for your spouse or both. This is super helpful. The reason we attach deep meaning to a situation or issue is because it's attached to the dream, that's a big concept for this chapter, the dream we have of how our life should be. We have this view, this vision of what our life's going to be like and what it's going to be like, and that issue or conflict is coming in directly against your vision for the world or how you think your marriage should be. And there's a reason for that as well. We have dreams that our spouse either isn't aware of, hasn't acknowledged, or doesn't respect. For instance, as we said before, underneath the dream to make lots of money may be the need for security. Our deepest dreams are frequently, Gottman says, rooted in childhood. We are either seeking to, one of two things, to either recreate some of the warmest memories from our childhood, or we feel the psychological need to distance ourselves from painful childhood memories. Our deepest dreams are for instance, a couple may fight over whether to go, here's a good example, they may fight over whether to go out on Sunday nights to a restaurant. However, Sunday nights hold a special place in both of their hearts, the husband and the wife, stemming from their childhoods. Her dream is to eat out on Sunday nights because her family always did growing up, which was a treat that made her feel special. But for the husband, a restaurant meal was always much less a treat than having his very busy mother cook for the family something she only did on Sundays. So the question of a restaurant versus a home meal is really symbolic of what makes each of them feel loved. Now that's kind of a simple example, but it does illustrate the point in the connection. So a person has a dream, and what is the dream? The dream is what I'm going to argue attached to a soul need. Like, I need this in order to feel loved. I need this in order to feel accepted. I need this in order to feel valued. So can you see how it's not, for this couple, for another couple, it might just be talking about going out to a restaurant, or do you want to eat at home? Okay, no big deal. But for this couple, it's a lot more than that. So just take that now and say, okay, there might be something where, you know what, we're at loggerheads, we're gridlocked, and we get way too emotional about when we're talking about certain things. If that's the case, if you have problems like that, do the work and realize that there's probably something going on beneath the surface that goes back to something in the childhood, whether good or bad, okay? That is super helpful. Whew. Why do some couples cope so gracefully with these sorts of issues while others get bogged down? The difference is, this is critical, is that the happy couples are aware of each other's dreams and consider helping each other realize them to be one of the goals of marriage. In satisfying relationships, partners incorporate each other's goals into their concept of what their marriage is about. Quick example in my marriage. My wife has a degree in graphic design. She worked, 10 years in graphic design, made good money at it, and she got to the place where she says, I'm sick of sitting at a desk. I don't want to sit at a desk anymore. And I heard her say this perpetually. I don't want to be tied down like this. And so she was looking around for something that would give her freedom, because my wife, if you know her, she needs freedom. So she felt locked in a prison or a cage doing this desk job, even though she was very good at it. And she just they loved her. She just went above and beyond. She comes up with this idea of real estate, because real estate, she makes her own hours. So for me, I realized what was going on beneath the surface, her sense of freedom. So I fully supported it and got behind and did whatever I could to help her, not only appreciated her dream, but did what I could to actually see her dream come true. So when she needs help, I'm there to help her. But it's definitely her dream that I'm supporting. So for instance, if I always say it's her houses. I don't say it's our houses. It's her houses, because I'm supporting her when I say that. All right. The key to ending gridlock is to openly discuss why your position is so important to you, and to be particularly open about the history behind your position and what it means to you. And you could be oblivious to that, because you may not have thought about it. Gottman calls this sort of discussion the dreams within conflict approach to gridlock. It not only helps to diffuse the problematic issue, but also increases your sense of intimacy and connection. So what Gottman argues is, become a dream detective. If you've reached gridlock in your marriage on any issue, big or small, you need to identify which dream or dreams is fueling the conflict. One good indicator that you're wrestling with a hidden dream is that you consider your spouse to be the source of the marital difficulty. My spouse is a slob, or irresponsible, or overly demanding. That's a sign of a hidden dream. Why is it a sign of a hidden dream? They won't budge. That's essentially the reason. Because it means something, so much to them. Why does it mean so much? Because that underlying value system that may stem back to the childhood. It may indicate that you don't see your part in creating the conflict because it has been hidden from view. Hidden from your view, perhaps, hidden from your spouse's view. One or both. Couples have to feel safe enough to discuss their dreams. Often dreams go underground, because a spouse doesn't feel entitled to their dream. But that doesn't stop them, Gottman says, from longing for their dream. When you bury a dream, it just resurfaces in disguised form as a gridlocked conflict. For one spouse, a messy house might be a sign of comfort and freedom. Freedom from criticism. Because their mom was always nagging them growing up to keep the house clean and was overly concerned with appearances. Gottman says, like plastic on the furniture, for instance. For their spouse, however, a messy house is a sign of chaos. Because there was no structure in their house growing up, and their parents weren't dependable. It's the idea of, they wouldn't show up to pick them up from school and things like this. There wasn't any food when they got home. The clothes were never clean. There was all kinds of chaos in the home growing up. So what happens? They grow up and it's like, I'm going to keep everything neat and tidy for my kids so they have stability. And it's predictable, and they don't have to worry. So that's what's happening. That's the backstory. But what is the spouse seeing all this? If they don't know all that, what do they look at? Oh, my wife's just a clean freak. She's dominating. She's controlling. She's always nagging me to clean things up. If you don't understand the underlying dream behind it, it looks crazy to you. And so instead of it bringing you close together because you have compassion for your wife's background or your husband, it actually pushes you further away. Because you just see the symptoms. You don't understand the deeper root. I think that's super helpful. So, working on and there's lots of other examples he gives in the chapter, by the way. I'm just picking out one. The very nature, so if you want to work on a gridlocked marital issue, the very nature of gridlock means that your dreams appear to age. Sorry, that's a typo. That your dreams are in opposition. So you've both become deeply entrenched in your positions in fear, accepting each other's influence and yielding. So you don't want to talk about it because you're afraid you're going to be asked to give up something you know you can't give up. Gottman is not arguing that you're going to solve every problem. But he is arguing that you can take a gridlock problem, instead of it driving you apart, it can bring you closer together, even though you may not end up agreeing in the very end. Okay? That's where we're going. Almost done. So step one, you have to explore the dream or dreams. Choose a particular gridlocked conflict to work on. Then, he says, write an explanation of your position. Don't criticize or blame your spouse. Instead, so if you have a dream, he says, write it out, your dream, organize it. But when you're writing it out, don't include, my wife or husband is always against me on this. Just focus on the dream. Instead, focus on what each partner needs, wants, and is feeling about the situation. Explain where the underlying dream comes from and why it's so meaningful to you. For instance, how you want to spend your money. It'd be really helpful to know why you're all about security, but they're all about elaborate vacations. Write about why, the dream behind it. Once you understand which dreams are fueling the gridlock, it's time to talk about them. So you sit down, each person gets 15 minutes as the speaker and 15 minutes as the listener. And in this time, this initial interface, do not try to solve the problem. That's going to be counterproductive. Your goal is to understand why each of you feels so strongly about the issue. So here's what's happening. It's not just that one person, oftentimes, it's not just that one person has a dream. you both have a dream, so something catalyzes, say like money, and you both have a different vision or dream for what's important about money. That's why it's gridlocked. Now, if it's just one person has a dream, you're like, oh yeah, let's do that. Because it's not going to be a problem because it's not causing you to violate your own dream. You see? He gives the example with reference to the money thing is one spouse, the wife wants to buy a $30,000, wants to buy a cabin because she wants to be close to nature and have people over and go on vacations. But the husband, who grew up without a lot of money, needs to save $30,000 in order to feel okay. And both go back to their childhood. And he actually writes out how they actually solve that. Don't try to solve the problem. Your goal is to simply understand why each of you feels so strongly about the issue. The speaker's job is to explain what the dream is, where it comes from, what is symbolized for them, and why it's so important. While listening, suspend judgment. How you feel about your spouse in relationship to their dream is a separate issue, a satellite issue that should not be addressed right now. Don't spend your time thinking up rebuttals or ways to solve the problem. You're not there to fix it right now. You're there to listen. Your goal is only to understand your spouse. Your role is to just hear the dream and encourage your spouse to explore it. If you can, tell your partner that you support his or her dream, if you can. That doesn't necessarily mean that you believe the dream can or should be realized. So he gives 3 levels of honoring your partner's dream. Number 1, you express your understanding of the dream and your desire to learn more about it. You express your understanding and desire to learn more. 2, you actively work to enable the dream. 3, you become part of the dream. You fulfill the dream along with your spouse. Let me illustrate that for you. Say your partner's dream is super crazy. You're not going to tell them that, but it's to climb to the top of Mount Everest. Now, if someone says that to me, I'm thinking, okay, yeah, you're going to die. You know what I mean? Do you want to die? Because I have a movie at my house on iTunes. It's all about people climbing to the top of Mount Everest, and they all died. So that's what I'm thinking. It's dangerous. But I'm going to suspend my judgment, right? So my wife comes to me and says, my dream is to climb Mount Everest. So step 1 is for me to listen, understand, and appreciate that. And say, tell me about that. Why do you even want to do that? I need to know. Like, I want to understand her desire. Step 2 would be, if I took that further, and say, you know what? I support you in your dream. Let me help you raise money to do that. Okay? That would be supporting her in dream. Step 3 would be, if I said to her, I'm going to help you raise money, and then I'm going to climb to the top of Mount Everest with you. We're going to hold hands the whole way. And then we're going to renew our vows at the peak. And she's like, okay, that wasn't part of the dream. That's weird. But do you see the different levels? Okay, can we at least do level 1? Can we at least do level 1? I mean, is that asking too much? So here's the thing. If we're not spending time on date nights and building our love mats all the time, and we're just getting this negativity, and we're at loggerheads and gridlock, but we don't really know our spouse. We don't know the dream that's under. We don't really know them. And so, of course, it just seems like chaos in our home. Step 2, if you're going to attempt this, and you should, soothe. You got to learn to soothe yourself. And previous chapters talked about techniques for soothing yourself and soothing your partner. Use repairs if you become upset. Pay attention to your heart rate. Look for flooding. Spend 20 minutes calming down and try again if you become flooded. So you may not get it the first time. Okay, it may just be too emotional. Try it again. Don't give up. Reschedule. Step 3, compromise. Gottman calls this the 2-circle method. He says, separate your dream into 2 parts, the non-negotiables and then the areas of flexibility. The non-negotiables and the areas of flexibility. So what that makes me think of is more than one way to skin a cat, right? So there might be different options about how the dream can be fulfilled. So you could discuss this. Okay, here's the things I will not waver on, cannot waver on, but here's the things, the different manifestations or expressions that dream could take on. Or it may be a matter of time period. Okay, I don't have to climb Mount Everest in 3 years. I'm willing to wait and do it in 5. Okay? So you got to, whatever your situation is, when it comes to a gridlock, you got to separate that into non-negotiable versus flexible. Once a couple has discussed the symbolic meaning of their positions, a transformation can take place. This is the good part. A transformation can take place. Rather than seeing each other's dreams as threats, they see them for what they are. Deep desires held by someone they love. Do you see what's happening here? It's like, aha, oh, that's where you're coming from. That's what it means to you? Ah, I love you. I want to support you. No wonder. And before I knew this, now I understand the problem, because if it's that meaningful to you for those reasons, all I've been doing is coming against that. I'm so sorry, please. I had no idea. And I should have had an idea. You see how that changes things? And it could be vice versa. So here's what Gottman is saying. If you can simply understand the depth behind each of your positions, it's going to bond you. It's going to give you reason to love instead of it driving you apart. That's what he's arguing for. That's his main thing. Step 4, say thank you. Say thank you. If a person takes the time to explain that part of their bearing their soul to you, thank them. In fact, so we want you to end on a positive note. Offer your spouse 3 specific thank yous. And for suggestions, you can go back to the I appreciate list that we already went through. Give them 3 specific thank yous about what you're grateful for what they shared. Summary. You have to, and this is the last part, you have to dig deep and figure out why the issue is so important to you. And then you have to spend the time communicating that to your spouse. You may not solve the problem, but you will be able to understand where your spouse is coming from, and the situation no longer will crowd out the love and joy from your relationship. That's the hope. So here it's so simple, isn't it? But it is really profound change. Like, we have warrant for believing Gottman knows what he's talking about. He's got the credibility. So what he's saying is, if you're gridlocked about something, you really got to sit down with each other and talk it out. That's what he's saying. And you got to go deeper with it. You may have had the same conversation 1,000 times, right? You start here in the conversation, and it always ends here. But if you'll add these extra steps of like, okay, I got to do the work of understanding why this matters so much to me. What dream is it attached to? My view for what my life was going to be like, is going to be like, will be like, and make the connection between that vision and your past, why it's important, you back to your childhood, whether it's good or bad. And then I got to be able to communicate that to my spouse as they listen. You can come to a different outcome. And if you'll do that for each other, it'll bring you closer together instead of further apart. Now, if you'll get that far in the process, then you say, okay, which parts are non-negotiable? Like, if these are the parts I can't give up on, because I feel like if you're forcing me to give up on this, you really don't love me. Because if I've already told you my story and everything behind it, and you still don't care, you probably don't. You're going to be convinced the person doesn't love you, that it's a joke, and then you're going to retreat into safety. You're like put the armor on, forget vulnerability. You're like, I'm sleeping with a stranger or an enemy, which is a scary place to be in, right? So then you're just going to turn into roommates. And then you got to do the same thing for the person, because you're like, there's a reason they're so against what I'm trying to do here. There's got to be a deep reason. So let's explore why they feel like they can't give up on that. And if you'll take it that far, chances are you will, at least the emotional, pressure is going to be much more greatly dissipated. So you don't end up hating each other and don't have to get flooded when you talk about it. But even beyond that, you can say, wow, we've stayed calm this far in the conversation for once. Then you can see clearly enough to say, okay, here's non-negotiable, here's flexible. You actually might be able to solve the problem, because you're like, you know what? Now that I understand the depth in all of it beneath the surface, I have a brilliant solution how we can both achieve our dreams. And that's what you want. You want both to achieve your dreams. There's probably a way to do it. Let's assume there is a way to do it. But oftentimes we never get that far because we're getting too heated and too emotional because we're bringing this baggage from our past with us. And we get flooded before we ever come close to a solution or ever come close to understanding our spouse or them understanding us. So I hope that's helpful. It was super helpful for me. That's all we have for tonight. So you have the option of here in this environment, if it's free from stress and distraction at your home, for whatever reason, we'll be here till you want to be here. Or if it's better to go home, put the kids down, whatever, do that too. And go through the exercises, whether ones you need to get caught up on at this point, or you may want to rush home and do the quality of your sex life quiz. And find out that your spouse thinks your sex life really is as amazing as you believe it to be. Okay? And you would feel good about that. But if it's not the case, you would want to know, right? And then there's all kinds of great questions to ask each other in that section from that chapter, okay? And that was chapter 10. And like, if you don't have a great sex life, you could make it one. Okay? So providing sex to our partner, by the way, is one of the ways we protect our marriage. Okay? And more often than not, Gottman's going to say it's the women who are saying no and the men who want way too much sex. That's just the pattern. So there's ways to come together on that. All right. Hope that was helpful. We'll see you next time. Session 8, final session, which is all about preparing a vision for the future. It's a great section, and there's actually an appendix we're going to get to. So the last week, as far as the teaching time, is going to be well worth your money, but we're going to close it out, okay? All right, and I'll just throw this commercial out there. We just started last Sunday a series on marriage from another book that I absolutely love. It's more the theological or theology and philosophy behind marriage and the design itself. And we just started that last Sunday. We're probably going to do at least another 4 or 5 Sundays, maybe 7 Sundays. So you're invited to that if you want the other side of things when it comes to marriage. All right. Thank you for your attention. Wish you all the best in the exercises.